Hello, I'm Julie Hansen. Welcome to the Sales Experts channel. In a moment, I'm going to be talking about how to overcome your fear of the camera and ramp up remote sales. But first, I want to give a shout out to everybody who's new here and let you know you found a really great resource. There are over 100 sales experts that do sessions on a multitude of sales topics. And if you download the schedule below, there's a link to some upcoming topics. You can find something I'm sure that will help you in your sales efforts. There's also about 500 recorded sessions, so check that out as well. I am the founder of Performance Sales and Training and the author of 2 sales books, Sales Presentations for Dummies. You may be familiar with that series. And no, I did not write them all, which someone asked me recently. I'm also the author of Act Like a Sales Pro, which incorporates proven acting techniques into sales, which is a little bit what I'm going to be talking about today. And it combines my career in acting and sales, my experience in both. And I'll present some of those tips today. I want to let you know that this session is pre-recorded so that I could share some video clips on some do's and don'ts in front of the camera for you. So if you do have any questions, please jot them down and send me an email at juliet@actingforsales.com and I will get back with you right away. All right, so before we dive in, let's talk about why we use video in sales. Why is it so important? It's certainly more important than ever now that most teams have gone remotely. But there's always been some very good reasons to use that. And the first one being that people respond to faces. We are built to respond to the human face. We read so much from other people's faces. And when you take that element away, we're left with just this voice and we're trying to interpret only from your voice and your words, which limits that experience. 80% of the population are visual learners. So again, your audience is learning and gaining a better understanding of what you're saying from those visual cues. And if you think about it, the camera really humanizes you. It is much easier to turn down someone a salesperson, for instance, that calls you on the phone than someone that you're face to face with, because it makes you real. And it's very hard to dismiss that reality when you have that visual connection. And eye contact is a huge component in relationship building. Without it, yes, it can be done. And I'm sure you have friendships, relationships that maybe you've started over email or just talk, but it's very difficult to replace that immediate connection that having eye contact can contribute to your relationship. And if all these reasons don't work for you, this will probably get you as a salesperson. Gong.io, who does a lot of great studies and research on recorded sales calls and demos, found that webcams are used 41% more often in closed deals than lost deals. Now that's pretty significant. So lots of great reasons to turn on your camera and get in front of it. So let me ask you this. What is keeping you from doing that? What is keeping you from using video? Now, I know there's a lot of people out there that will just tell you, just suck it up, get over it, get in front of the camera. I get it. That doesn't work for me, and I imagine that hasn't worked for you, which is why you're here. So this is what I hear from a lot of salespeople. It just feels awkward, right? Well, my customer doesn't have their camera on. That's a good excuse I hear. Or I get nervous and I forget what to say. There's so many other things to manage. I'm doing a demo, I'm doing a presentation, I got technical issues. I need to look at my script or my notes. I don't have everything memorized. Or how about this? I hate the way I sound or look on camera. Well, guess what? I've been an actor and I still hate the way I sound and look on camera. We just don't look or sound the way we think we should or do. And that should not be a barrier, right? We need to put that aside and just understand that we can be our best in front of the camera. It may not be what we think it looks like, but it will be compelling and engaging to our audience if we do certain things. So what happens is we're trying to take these live presentation skills and apply them to our remote virtual audience, and it just doesn't work. It's much like an actor going from a stage performance to a film. It's a very different mode. It's an entirely different medium. But the thing is, they know that, and they're not necessarily natural at it. When I went from stage acting to film acting, I had to take some classes to learn how to act in front of the camera, to learn how to just be myself in front of the camera, because there's some real differences. And the primary ones are this: there's no audience. Typically, certainly on a set in a film, there's no audience, there's the rest of the camera crew. But on a sales call, a lot of times you don't even have your prospect with their video up there. So you're talking to a black dot, right? Or a black box. So you don't have that energy to feed off of. And that's a big problem with remote sessions. And you may feel that yourself, or maybe you've been on the other end of some remote calls that are just kind of flat because there's no energy exchanging. It's also very difficult, or more difficult, to keep your energy up as the presenter, because you're at home, you're in your home office, perhaps, and you can get a little comfortable and casual, and the energy just drops and it drops. And we often misread that idea that being natural means being very relaxed. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Our focus is different on camera, on remote calls. When you're in a room with someone, there's lots of things you can both focus on, but your focus gets very limited and the scale gets much smaller on a remote call. You've got your stage and it's this area here, right? And that is it. And there are very few times in our life where we just sit here and have this one-on-one conversation and just look at the other person in the eye for maybe 45 minutes. There is nothing natural about this. So if you feel like it's unnatural, you're right. But I'm going to share with you some techniques that will make you feel more comfortable and free in this very unnatural environment, so that you'll be able to come across more present, more engaged, and more connected with your customer or prospect. There are lots of resources out there on what's the best camera, how do I set up my camera, how do I set up the lights, all the technical aspects. And I'm not going to cover that because there's lots of resources on that. So I'm going to really focus on you and how to make sure you're coming across as best as possible. So we're going to talk about this concept of being natural on camera, what that really means, how to own your stage, this little piece of real estate that you have. And I'm going to talk about some things you can do both pre and post camera to make sure that you're presenting the best version of yourself and that you can really form a strong connection with the person on the other side of the camera. So what does being natural on camera actually mean? What does it mean when people say, just be yourself, just act natural? Well, first of all, do not mistake that for the thought that we want you to be just in your most natural, relaxed state. That's not what we're looking for as an audience, right? We don't want the you that's chilling out, channel surfing, right? So that natural state that we're striving for is actually, it's very present, it's very engaged, it's very connected to your audience, and not that laid back, super chill, relaxed version that we maybe think of when we hear the word natural and relaxed. And oftentimes it's hard to achieve that because we do have some nerves. And I'll tell you that some of the best actors in the world have nerves or feel anxious before being filmed or before going on stage. And that doesn't keep them from doing it. And they don't try and get rid of those nerves, because that is energy. And that energy can be channeled in a positive way and put into your performance to help you connect with the other person and to be more expressive. And so we want to apply that too. And when we start to talk about some of the things you can do before you get on camera, at the end of the session, I'll share with you how to channel some of that energy. So this concept of being natural, let's talk about what that means. And it really starts with making friends with your camera. You may have heard the saying that great actors, the camera loves them, right? And that's not actually the case, because the camera itself is indifferent. The camera picks up what it sees. It picks up not just your expression, your look, what you're wearing, it picks up how you feel because that comes across in your eyes, in your face, with your body language. So if you are feeling a little indifferent or you're feeling uncomfortable, that can read like something is off, like you're uncertain. It can give someone pause. And in these times where we really need to develop trust with others, we want to eliminate anything that might give someone a chance to say, I don't know, I just didn't feel comfortable with that person. So we have to throw out this idea that the camera loves some people and some people it dislikes. It doesn't have to love you. You need to love the camera, or at least make friends with the camera. And I'm going to show you a couple of quick steps to help you do that. The first thing to know about making friends with your camera is that, like most friendships, they don't happen instantaneously. We need to work on it. We need to build that relationship. So we can do that in some small steps. What I recommend is filming yourself a minute a day, a couple minutes a day, just to get comfortable with the setup and with your camera. And it can be something very impromptu, it can be something prepared, but just to get that experience and get over that discomfort of being in front of your camera. So it might look something like this on day one. Okay, camera. Julie told me this was a good way to get comfortable. Feels pretty awkward talking to this black dot. But I'm going to try it because I really want to be able to connect more with my customers. So I'm going to give it a shot. Day 2. Okay, camera, here I am back for more. Let's see. Today I'm going to introduce myself. Give that a shot. I'm Julie Hansen. I'm the founder of Performance Sales and Training and the author of 2 sales books, and I work with sales teams on live and virtual presentation and demo skills. All right, you get it, right? So just take those small incremental steps and you'll start to get over that hurdle. Now, another thing about making friends with the camera is to think about talking to a good friend. Oftentimes when we get in this remote situation, or even live when we're talking to someone we don't know, we can get very stiff and rigid and formal, oddly formal, and it doesn't connect us to the other person. So say I'm talking to a new prospect here. Hi, Jan. Nice of you to join me today. I thought we would talk about how to leverage the power of storytelling with your sales team and remove some of those barriers that might be keeping them from using stories in their sales efforts. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about? All right. Not terrible, but probably felt a little stiff and formal, yes? Okay, so now let's suppose that I am talking to a good friend. I'm talking to someone who is excited to hear about what I have to say or excited about this topic. It's going to feel very differently. Hi, Jan. How are you today? Great. So we're going to talk about how to leverage the power of storytelling with your sales team and how we might eliminate some of those barriers that are keeping them from using it so that they can start to see the benefits from using stories with their prospects. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about today? So hopefully you saw there was a little more life and energy in that. You felt a little more connected to me. And it's just all on the inside. I'm just thinking this person likes me and wants to hear from me. And so often we just take the assumptive stance that people are on the defensive and they don't want to hear this. Now, you may be right, but it does you no benefit to think that way, right? It's not to your advantage. And a lot of times, if someone starts out thinking they don't want to hear this and you approach it in a way where you're expecting this positive response, you can actually influence that person's attitude. Okay, so the other thing we want to talk about is, where do we look? You may have noticed that I am looking mostly at you. I hope you've noticed that. Our goal is to have that eye contact be about 2/3 of the time, which is a lot. However, many times when I'm on remote calls, this is how I see people talking to me. So what we're going to talk about today is leveraging the power of storytelling and how we can remove some of those barriers that your sales team is experiencing. What's the problem with that? Do you feel disconnected? Right, I am absolutely talking to you, but what am I looking at? I'm not looking at the camera, I'm looking at your picture. And that is the strongest temptation when we have our screen in front of us, right? To look at the picture because we want to look at the other person's face. And I get it, I feel that same draw. But to the person on the receiving end, it feels like you are not paying attention to them, you are disengaged. And we know in our brains that's not true, but it doesn't process that way, right? It processes as this person is not attentive. Especially when someone is talking. If you were talking and I was looking down, you might think, is she listening to me? Right? And we're absolutely trying to listen. We're trying to read their face, and I get that. It's important to try to look at the camera as much as possible and take some glances down to check body language and facial expression. But it's very important to try to maintain that eye contact as much as possible, especially when you are saying something that you want them to remember, something very important, right? That's not a time to be looking down. Looking down also conveys a certain uncertainty or submissiveness that we want to avoid. And it just has some negative connotations with it. So look at the camera. To help you do that, you can try to move around the pictures, the videos of the other participants in your call to be as close to your camera as possible. Doesn't always work depending on what your setup is. A lot of times, again, your prospect doesn't even have a camera on. So just try to look at the camera, as awkward as it seems, and that's why we need to practice, okay? Now, people ask me, what about if I have a script? What if I have some notes I need to reference? Well, there are a number of good teleprompter tools out there that you can use with your laptop, your iPad, or your iPhone. If you do that, if you go that route, please practice, take some lessons on that, because again, this is not a natural skill and it can come across very mechanical. So be wary of that. You can also have a note stand, for instance, that you might place just right next to the camera, because we can glance around. I can glance off to the side, catch my place where I'm at, and get back to you. You can also just let people know that you need to access your notes. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that in this day and age, unless it's a very formal presentation. You can say things like, oh, you know what, Bob, there's a couple of questions I wanted to be sure and ask you, so I wrote them down. So let me, yes, so I wanted to, it looks like you wanted a solution in place by August. So what I need to know is what type of capacity you're looking for, et cetera, et cetera. Or I might want to make sure I get some numbers right. So I could say, you know, Bob, I want to make sure I get this number right for you. It's pretty impressive. So it looks like we're able to deliver XYZ units. So don't be afraid to just conversationally work that into your call. Okay, if you really need those to be accurate and you need to find your place, just do it and just get back to the camera as quickly as possible. So those are some tips on how to make friends with your camera and how to look at the camera and how to work with it as opposed to against it, so that your audience feels more engaged, which is the bottom line. So let's talk about your stage. Your stage is basically what the camera sees and therefore what your audience sees. It is this frame, right? So you need to be very familiar with that frame, because if you're doing something over here, guess what? The audience is not seeing it. First of all, my recommendation is that you use up as much of the frame as possible with your head and part of your torso. I like to have my hands available to gesture, but that's a personal preference. And the reason is this: oftentimes your picture on the other person's screen is very small anyway. And if you get very distant back here, how does that feel? Right? I'm suddenly this tiny little head, right? And so you can't see my facial expressions, and you feel farther away from me than you already are. So we want to make sure that we're using that frame wisely. Also, you want to think about your proximity to the camera and how close you are this way. Again, when we're too far back, feels like I'm not really paying attention. I'm a little too casual and relaxed, right? What about here? How does this feel? That can feel a little aggressive, yes? Especially if you're on a first call with someone. The tendency is when you get excited or you want to connect with someone, we tend to lean forward. And that just doesn't read well on camera, right? We tend to kind of get closer to them. And in person, we have a lot more space to play with, and it's not just our head jutting forward, so it doesn't look so odd. So be aware of that. The best position is to be upright as much as possible, to have good posture, and then to lean about 15% forward. And if you can measure 15% exactly, you're better than me. But just a little bit forward, because that makes you look more engaged and interested in the other person. Now, there's another thing we need to keep in mind when it comes to our stage, and that is this: objects may appear larger than they really are. For example, if I suddenly put my hands up towards the camera, say, I told this guy to stop. What does this look like to you? It looks like I have giant hands. I don't, I promise. See, normal, giant. So anything you put closer to the camera obviously is going to be out of proportion. So just be aware of that and try to keep your stage kind of this area right in front of you and to your frame. Okay, so again, you got to get really comfortable and aware of your frame and work within that. So try to keep all that activity, all that energy just right there in front of the camera in your stage space. So I want to introduce you to this concept of less is more and what that means in terms of speaking to someone on camera. And the great Sir Michael Caine had a wonderful book out about acting on camera, and I recommend it if you're looking for some additional support in that area. He said, theater acting is an operation with a scalpel, movie acting is an operation with a laser. So it's much more precise. And that means that on camera, you don't want to have that over-the-top energy. You don't want to have big, broad movements. You don't want to have fast, rapid movements. It's more subtle because the camera does pick up more subtleties. So what does that mean in terms of your movement and your activity? Well, again, keep your movements within your frame. You don't want to do a lot off frame, as I said before. Make slow, deliberate movements, right? We don't want to, this is hard to follow. It's just distracting, right? And you can think about, even with your voice, in terms of being more subtle. If you want to draw someone in, you can actually get quieter or slower. Now, this does not mean that we bring our energy down. We want to keep that intensity, and that's very important to keep that up. But we can still be intense and be energetic and bring it smaller. Okay, so this concept of less is more is a very important one for film, and you have to play around with it to kind of know what's too big and what's too small. And you can notice that when you start to record yourself, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So let's talk about some things we can do both before we go on camera and after we're on camera to improve our performance and our connection with our audience. So before we go on camera, there's a number of technical things we obviously want to check, but let's talk about what you can do to improve your own performance. First of all, walk your stage. A good actor always gets familiar with their stage every night, because things may change, right? You may have moved your computer. The lighting may be a little different today. It's a different time of day, right? So check all those things. What does your stage look like? What is the what do I look like on camera? Am I in the right position? Secondly, do a mic check. Again, settings may have changed, so just be sure that everything is working accordingly. And remember, I talked earlier about energy being such an important piece of that connection that you're going to have and you're going to bring to your audience. And nerves sometimes getting in our way and making that energy a nervous type of energy. One of the best ways to channel it is to do a physical and vocal warm-up. No good performer would think about walking in front of the camera or on stage without first warming up, because you are the instrument and your body will naturally get tense when you are nervous. And so as a performer, we're always fighting against that. And the way you fight against that tension is to release it, right? Is through movement, is through vocalizing. So I've put together a 7-minute power warm-up of some of my favorite acting warm-ups for your voice, for your body, that you can download on my site. Go to performancesalesandtraining.com/resources and look under tools for that 7-minute power warm-up, and you can just download it right away and run through those before you get in front of the camera. And it should definitely start to, first of all, make you feel more confident and channel some of that energy into a positive stream. And of course, energy is such a big piece of this. And if you can get energized by doing that warm-up, that should help. You may need to do a little extra. You may need to hop around. You may need to sing. Whatever you can do to elevate that energy is going to be very helpful, because no matter what you do, the act of sitting in front of a computer and having a camera in front of you will often bring that energy down. So you have to fight against that. I should caution, unless you're already a super high energy person and you have a different issue, to kind of bring that down to be more compatible with your audience. But for most of us, our energy starts to sink. So elevate it in the beginning so that you can maintain it throughout your conversation. And finally, all those things we need to then put aside and focus on our audience. Right? That's why we're there. That's what the point of this is, to be in our best state, to know what we're operating in, how to use the medium to connect with the other person. So I don't want you to go into your call thinking about, am I in my frame? Am I lean forward 15%, right? If you practice those things, they won't be top of mind. We want them to be just part of your repertoire, because your focus should be on the other person. By the way, that will also help eliminate some of those nerves. If I'm thinking about how I want you to feel, I'm not so busy thinking about how I'm feeling. All right, how about after we're on camera? What I'd like you to do is start to record yourself, not those first initial trial get to know you conversations with your camera, but some trial runs and perhaps some presentations or pitches that you do internally, and review those and review them objectively, which I realize is next to impossible for most of us, but I want you to try. I, for one, hate to watch myself on video. I have a bunch of old acting tapes that I never looked at. I had stopped acting, so there was nothing more for me to learn from that. But in business, I try to review some tapes to make sure that I am projecting what I want to project, right? That I am making the most effective connection with my audience as possible. So review it objectively, which means you don't get upset that you don't look the way you think you should look, because none of us do, right? We're seeing a mirror image of ourselves, and suddenly we're seeing what everyone else sees, and it doesn't compute. It's like, who is that person? I look odd. And then nothing looks right. So I want you to just review it in terms of, am I engaged? Do I look like I'm present? Is my voice expressive? Is my face expressive? Am I using my stage correctly? So ask yourself the right questions, as opposed to, why does my eyebrow do that? Or I need a haircut. Save that for later, okay? What went well? That's always hard to think about. It's like, well, I did a pretty good job of maintaining eye contact with the camera, right? I looked like I was engaged, so that's good. And then where can you improve? Maybe your gestures were too far off camera, right? You had too much outside of the frame. Maybe your voice was a little monotone. And then just pick one or two things to work on. Don't make a list, but just pick the top one or two things to work on and try and improve those over the next couple of calls and practice sessions. So these are all tools that you can use to ultimately be more effective in connecting with your customer and making them feel more confident in you and ultimately helping you sell more. I hope that you found a few tips in here that will help you. If you'd like to get a quick cheat sheet for most of the tips that I shared here today, please send me an email. Also, any questions you have, send me an email at julie@actingforsales.com. You can check out my website. I've got lots of articles, blog posts on how to be more compelling and engaging in our presentations, pitches, and demos. And I'd love to connect with you. So go out there, turn that camera on, make friends with it, and apply some of these techniques as you go, and you'll find yourself not only feeling more confident, but connecting more with your customers, and that should translate into more success for you as well. So go out there and happy selling.